Hey everyone, welcome back to the Whirling Circles Internal Martial Arts Podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Garcia. Of course, joined as always by Allen and Jon Molenar. And we haven't recorded a show in quite a while. You might have seen one that came out last week, but we actually recorded that a while back. We did the Woman Warrior episode last week, but that was actually recorded back in March during Women's History Month. And so we haven't been able to record for a while, so it's great to be back with you guys. Life was a little crazy for a couple of weeks, so it's good to be back. And it's almost like summertime in New York City.
Yeah,
Sweating
Unfortunately.
balls. The last time we had this conversation, we were still talking about snow. And now it's summertime in like 3 weeks. Oh, it's crazy. It was last weekend, it was like in the 90s. And then it was like 60 degrees the next day. It's just that time of year, I guess. But it hasn't been that much rain. So,
it's a weird spring that way.
yeah. How you feeling, Jon?
Good, really good. Stuff's coming up. We're practicing more with Frank at the, in person. Got a variety of projects in the works. So some filming and different things. So everything's pretty good.
Nice. Work is good. Traveling. Has it gotten crazy on the airlines?
Work is okay. Travel is coming up. That's exciting. So
Yeah, Jon
more.
works in the airline industry.
Yeah. The mere fact that there is any travel scheduled is exciting in and of itself.
Oh, you mean personal travel?
Yeah, I mean personal travel.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't been doing layovers for a long time. But yeah. It's during COVID, I'm not really that wild to like fly to another city and then walk around, because most places in the country have it worse than New York now. So a lot of places are closed down to a greater extent than New York is. So what do I want to go there and walk
Or you go to
around?
some states and you can wear a mask and no mask, and there's no restrictions in some places for better or worse.
Yeah, that's true too. True.
AKA Florida and Texas, right?
Right.
Oh man,
I think Georgia too.
Georgia now. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, Texas just up and set an indoor record for attendance at a fight. With the Canelo fight, they put it in a closed stadium. They had 73,000 fans in one building.
No mask.
It was a
No
record.
screening.
What do they call those? Super spreader events? Something like that?
That's wild. Yeah, the Knicks here in New York City sporting event. They had their first playoff game in a long time, and they had 15,000 people, which I think is the biggest indoor event in New York City since the pandemic. But they were like asking people for their COVID tests and stuff. So a little bit of a different approach. I think they said over 95% of attendees presented COVID vaccine, stuff. I don't know. It is what it is, right? We're going to be in this weird phase, I think, for a little while.
Hopefully only for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah. How you
Meanwhile,
feeling,
New
Frank?
York's one of the safest places on the planet.
I
Um,
know. How did that happen?
Absolutely. I'm feeling extra great. Goldie was here for a lesson this morning, and we actually got in a round of boxing, so I'm feeling extra good.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah. So this week we're getting into a pretty, for me at least, a pretty heavy conversation. And we'll try to, I will try to be the dumb person in the conversation, trying to get the simple answers. Even though some of the talents that Frank and Jon have are like breaking down these very complex um, theories into layman's terms, which is something unique, I think, about our school. But this week we're going to be talking about the I Ching's correlation to Baguazhang. And we've talked about, of course, Baguazhang, but we also have talked about the I Ching in past episodes, but we're going to really dig in deep and talk about the correlation. Um, so yeah, so Frank and John are gonna say confusing shit, and I'm gonna ask what it means. That's how we're doing it today. So, Frank, you want to get us started?
Sure. Well, the art of Baguazhang right off the bat is named after the I Ching. Ba Gua Zhang, 8 trigram palm. So right from the beginning, it's named after it. And everybody sort of, not everybody, but most Bagua people are into the fact that the founder studied some type of Taoist training method, which was good for health and had something to do with the I Ching, henceforth the name Baguazhang. But as I've mentioned before, Bagua people are very independent and they don't agree on almost anything. And that's kind of natural because the founder only taught Baguazhang as a sort of a graduate course, an advanced course. Dong Hai Chuan would not teach Baguazhang to anyone who wasn't already proficient at another martial art. And then he theoretically had 72 disciples, and he tailored their training to each one personally. You were trained according to your previous martial art, according to your physical stature, according to your physical capabilities, according to your mental capabilities, according to your emotional output, according to your personal background. Everybody got something a little bit different. So it led to this martial art coming down. Even though of the 72 students, only 2 of them had schools that became very, very famous. And most of the schools today are either from Yinfu or Chuntinghua. But even within that, everybody has their own little take on things, and there are mixes of the two that have become their own styles. And so everybody has a different idea of the thing. And I've run into quite a number of Bagua schools that say there was some kind of base that he took it from. There's the name. That's it. There's no more I Ching correlation.
Mm.
And then there are various schools that say, of course, there's the I Ching correlation, but how do they manifest it? And there are many different ways of manifesting it. There are schools that have 8 hand positions for the 8 trigrams, and with the right and left hand, they create their hexagrams. There are schools that will create the trigram energy by your upper third of your body has the energy of the top line, your middle third of your body has the energy of the middle line, the bottom third of your body has the energy of the bottom line. There are schools that have 8 different postures, which represent the trigrams. And you walk in these postures. And there are schools that have 8 different palm changes, with each palm change is correlated to a trigram. Now, of course, trigrams, the I Ching is the classic of change. It's almost the foundation of all Chinese culture and philosophy. Every philosophy that China has respects and has an aspect of the I Ching. The I Ching is the oldest, and even though we don't have the oldest version, there was the I of Jia, the I of Shang, and the I of Zhou. And the I of the Zhou dynasty is what we have as the I Ching. The first 2, the Jia and the Shang, disappeared, probably in the great book burning of the first emperor. Wonderful guy that he was.
Mm.
And so we have the I of Zhou is the I Ching. And I Ching, the classic of change. And as primary, I mean, it started out with theoretically the ancient shaman emperor Fuji. So one story is that he saw these 8 markings on a turtle shell. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
I was gonna say, was there
But
like 8 markings from an alien invasion in ancient China that were projected onto a turtle's back?
but the thing is, the shamans used to do divination
Mm.
by taking a turtle shell and heating it till it cracked, and then reading the cracks. That's more than likely that they got these 8 symbols from the cracks that came up from that type of divination.
Hmm.
And that from there, he developed the idea of the 8 basic changes of which these were symbols of. And then later, mystic scholars upped it to the 64, where you take the the two trigrams and put them together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all based on the Chinese philosophical idea that everything comes from emptiness, one, to develops into the balance of opposites, two, or yin yang. And you come from Wu Ji, nothingness, to yin yang or Tai Chi. That's what that martial art is actually named after. Tai Chi, the balance of opposites.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take these and you represent them in some specific manner of two different things, which in I Ching are just lines, an unbroken line for the yang, male, light, sun aspect, and a broken line for the yin, the female, moon, dark aspect. And then if you take these different symbols, how many correlations can you get if you put three of them together? And it comes up with only 8 variations that are possible when you go from the 2 to the 3. And then if you take 2 of these 3 trigrams or 3 line designs and put them together, how many correlations of that can you get? And there's 64 and only 64. Now, I'm not big on higher math, but I've had people that are tell me that this is a mathematical progression that could go ad infinitum. But the thing is, somewhere along the line, somebody said when you're using it to represent changes, the 64 changes are about as what's going to come up in a human life.
Mm.
So as human beings, we didn't need to go beyond the 64 of this correlation. Now, the book has been used as a book of divination from the time it began, to figure out which of these hexagrams, these symbols, represent the time that you were in, because remember, it's a book of change. And then from that, you figure out what's going on. You look at what came before, you look at what's coming after, you can kind of figure out where it came from, where it's going to. And the thing that bugs me a bit is that in classical times, you went to someone that you knew was connected to the psychic side of themselves. These people had psychic abilities. They were augurs, they were priests, they were meditative hermits, but you went to somebody that you knew had that connection, and they would do the coins or the sticks to then apply their psychic abilities to make sure that you got to the right place. Somewhere along the line, I'm willing to bet in the 60s, when everybody was doing everything, that, drop some acid. Yeah, I can do that. And all of a sudden it comes out, everybody and their brother thinks that they can throw the coins or the sticks and get the correct answer.
Mm.
And then they wonder why it doesn't come out. Well, it wasn't done that way. It wasn't just anybody did it. They were people, like I said, that were some type of spiritual, mystical type person that were connected to the psychic side of themselves. But behind this, the I Ching is a study of the phenomenon of change. It's a binary system for charting the flow of change, and you can study it as such. And Confucius was the last person to add to it. You had stuff by King in this I of Zhou, which we have. You had stuff by King Wen, the first king of the Zhou dynasty, the Duke of Zhou, which was his successor and relative. And then later, a few hundred years, Confucius came along and added what's called the 10 wings. And it was Confucius that said, when he said, if I had another 70 years to study this book, maybe I'd really start to figure it out. And he was in his 70s when he said that.
Yeah.
And if someone in their 70s that's been studying it for a while, I absolutely understand what he was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
There's an awful lot to it. But it is a study of the phenomenon of change. So to figure out where you are in it, where it came from, where it's going to. And Confucius also very wisely said that if you actually studied the book and you studied it thoroughly, you would never have to throw the coins or the sticks, because you would know from knowing the system where you are.
Mm.
You would know where you are from knowing that system, and you would just go to that and then work from there as to trying to learn where it came from and where it was going. With Confucius writing this stuff, it's got a lot of Confucian ideas of how a person should act and how a person should act within society. And it's often been said that the basis of the Taoist study of the book is really mostly contained in the names, the numbers, and the sequence. And then all the stuff about how you should act is Confucian.
No, I see.
But I find that an overall view of the thing is really where it is. But the sequence of the 64 hexagrams or the 64 gua is very important. Sometimes in our studies of the I Ching, like we have a Baguazhang and I Ching class that we've done for a long time. And one of the things that comes up occasionally is to just read the 64 sequences, which is supposed to be really the foundation of the Taoist study of the thing, because as you go through the sequences, you get to feel the change. And the book is separated in the upper and lower canons, and they're not separated equally. There's 34 gua in the upper canon, and 30 gua in the upper canon and 34 gua in the lower canon. And the upper canon is the canon of heaven, which is supposed to be explaining the changes that go on between heaven and earth. And the lower canon is the canon of humanity, which is the changes that go on between people and the earth.
Mm.
And you read through all 64 of those and you get a feeling for the flow. In fact, you can kind of see that the flow in the upper canon tends to be larger waves. And when you get to the flow of the lower canon, they're smaller waves. But there are different ways to go about this when you correlate it with your Baguazhang.
And when you say throwing sticks, you mean literally like kind of like throwing sticks, like fortune telling kind of.
Well, they're called the yarrow stalks.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually never done it. I've only done the 3 coins. So I'm not even sure. John, do you remember how many stalks there are?
I've seen the coins, yeah.
But
Are you talking about the ones in the temples, Frank, where they have these huge pots of them with hundreds of those sticks that have fortunes on them? Is that the thing, or is it something else?
No. It's just, you can find them in hippie bookstores all over the place. There's something like probably 8, but I'm not sure. I don't think that's really the number of these 6 or 8 inch sticks. And there's something about throwing them and how they land. I never really learned how to do the yarrow stalks. I did the coins for a while, and then I got into the concept of studying the book as a study of the phenomenon of change as a superior method, although that did come after the divination.
Mm.
The book was originally used as a book of divination, and then later people figured out, wait, you can just study this thing as it becomes a textbook for studying the phenomenon of change.
Mm. Go ahead, John.
Well, there's also various ways that you can potentially interact with it, right, Frank, in terms of the divination thing, because the coins are another way that people do it. And then I feel like there's even other ways than that in which people are, trying to use it for divination. So sticks, coins, or other methods, right?
Well, the sticks or coins are the 2 classical ones.
Okay.
In fact, I don't even really know of other methods, but I'm sure somebody's thought them up. In fact, I think along the line somewhere I saw cards from somebody who was obviously trying to correlate the I Ching with the tarot. So I have seen I Ching cards, but I have no idea what they were about. I just saw that they were there. But
well, I had a question real quick. So we talked a little bit about this during our Chinese philosophy podcast, but is that concept that people at different times of their existence have different, like there's elements that are higher in them or more influencing in their current existence as they go through a constant transitions and changes, and that if you have a better understanding of where you currently are in relation to these different elements, that you can have a more stable or more beneficial existence? Like, why would somebody want to know, like, and study the or get a reading done or anything like that? What would be the goal of it?
Well, particularly, if you're in some kind of change pattern, you're in something's going on, and you want to figure out where it is. The I Ching, like you look at where it is, but you also look at the one before and the one after. And by doing that, you kind of see why it came about that way. And then by reading it and then reading a little bit of the one after, you see what's coming and you get some insight and sort of hints on how to deal with it. That's the whole thing, how to deal with these changes.
Do you have any
And although,
examples that might have happened to you or one of your students that you were studying the book and you were going through one of these periods?
well, that gets into, give me a little time to get into how our particular Bagua system correlates it, and then I'll give you a big one.
Okay.
But it wasn't just the book, it was the whole way that our system works it. Because the whole thing, first off, as a general martial art, the people that just sort of say, yeah, it has something to do with the I Ching, but peripherally, the peripheral idea is the I Ching's about change, and Bagua as a martial art is about change.
Mm.
It's constantly coiling, constantly twisting, constantly circling, constantly changing direction. And a Bagua boxer never stands still, so he's in movement and continuous change all the time. And some Bagua boxers will tell you that's it as far as the correlations between the I Ching and Baguazhang happen. And even though the basic practice of walking around a circle, when you actually get into Bagua martial arts, people of the highest levels will tell you that you never completely circle around anybody.
Mm.
In fact, Liu Jingru said, yes, this run around them and try to make them dizzy came from that stupid movie. Here's another one, Pride's Deadly Fury, or The
Oh,
Honor of Dong Fang Shi, the Li Junfeng, who was actually a very well-known Bagua practitioner out of the Li Ziming school in China, but he stars in it. And at one point, he's fighting Russians on the platform, and he goes around and round and around the Russian until the Russian gets dizzy. And our teacher had to point out to us that that's ridiculous. That you never go more than a 45, 90-degree angle, maybe 180 to get behind them. But beyond that makes absolutely no sense martially. But it comes from the exercises of correlating the I Ching. Somebody said it's about change. How do you create change? Simply, well, you walk in a direction and you change and go in the other direction. Change. So that became the basis of the practice, is walk in a direction, change in another direction, and the manner in which you change in the other direction became the pattern of change which you were working with.
Mm.
Now, like I said, there's all these different ideas about the hands and the parts of the body and postures. We actually have 8 postures that we also do. But I keep telling people that start and go, oh, I'm getting the energy change pattern from the postures. I'm like, no, that's to give you an inkling.
Mm-hmm.
That's so once you've actually done the work with the palm change to just rev it up and click into it easily, or at the beginning of it to get an inkling of what this change pattern is. Because the system that we use, we were lucky to key into. I had a teacher who had hooked up with an old Taoist guy in Beijing who had spent a bunch of time in the Southwest Mountains studying with them, and he'd come up with what he was convinced. He was also a Bagua master, Yin Fu style Bagua master. And he decided that he had actually discovered the particular system that Deng Hai Chuan, the founder of Baguazhang, had studied and adapted into Bagua, the martial art. And having looked at the other methods in this one, I think there's a good chance he was right.
Mm.
There's a good chance he was right. But whether it is the one or not, it's really effective for a study of the patterns of change. Because what it begins with is you have a set of palm changes, 8 palm changes, which the practice of that palm change will create the energy change pattern within you. And the whole thing is that these trigrams are 8 energy change patterns. And I'm sure there are many different ways to describe them, but within our system, you have the heaven change, upward, outward. You have the earth change, inward, downward. You have the wind change, and amorphous to solid oscillation. Now, like with those three, pure heaven is also pure masculine, and it's upward outward with secondary correlations of endless, effortless, emotionless. And I have to say, obviously, it's the energy change pattern of adolescent boys' sexuality. Upward, outward, endless, effortless, emotionless. The female, in and down, secondary, soft and heavy. You know, it's like making love with the Venus of Willendorf, and she's on top. Soft and heavy, in and down. Then the wind pattern, an amorphous to solid oscillation. The wind is absolutely amorphous to solid. It's amorphous. You can't touch the wind. It's solid. It can knock you down. So therefore, the wind is amorphous and solid. Fourth is the thunder change pattern. Thunder change pattern is a shock wave, a yang explosion with a series of yin reverberations. And you got this shock wave thing. Five is fire. It's a pattern of clinging and coiling energy change pattern. It's hot and it sticks. Like you can see a fire catches a couch and it clings and coils and burns, but then it moves over to the curtains and it clings and coils and it goes up and then it gets in the ceiling and it burns and clings and coils through the dust, comes down to the curtains in the next room and does the same thing. Clinging and coiling heat, which I've been known to joke is that's the energy change pattern of a really bad relationship.
I was just thinking the same thing. Clinging and coiling.
Coiling heat.
Oh my god.
Yep, absolutely. Then you have the water change pattern, which is known as water the abysmal. It's not the good parts of water, but the energy change pattern is a wave. You have this sucking undertow and this crashing head and this sucking undertow and this crashing head. When I was trying to develop that one, I sat around and looked at my old hippie wave machine for hours because you could watch it. Oh yeah, that's it. But that's what it is. You know, the undertow sucks you in. The crashing part drives you down, like how guys get drowned trying to surf shooting the pipeline because they don't get all the way through. They get driven to the bottom and can't get up in time to not drown. So it's often in the I Ching, it's sometimes it's not that abysmal, but in general, it's the idea of the negative aspects of water. Then you have mountain, which is compressed stillness to the center. Compressed stillness to the center. And with the secondary of the potential to explode out into light rays in every direction. But that's secondary to the compressed stillness to the center, mountain. And then you have lake, the joyous, the good parts of water. And lake is actually a Western translation, I've discovered. That the character actually says depression in the earth, it holds water and makes people happy. Because Western is, oh, that's a lake. We swim in the lake, we boat in the lake, we fish in the lake, we picnic by the lake. That must be a lake. Well, certain like historians and sociologists and whatnot have said for the ancient Chinese, that may have been a marsh. Because a marsh is where you can grow rice and not starve to death, which makes you very happy. Whatever it is, it's the depression in the earth that holds water and makes you happy. And originally, with a teacher that I learned this from, all we got on lake was that it's not consistent and neither does it recreate any of the previous 7 patterns. Which for years, it's like, what the hell is that? And then when we started doing 9 Palace, which is another whole different advanced system of mysticism and magic, which correlates with Baguazhang also. But we started doing 9 Palace, all of a sudden, we had the form of formlessness in lake, but in 9 Palace, we had that and we had the formlessness of form. And all of a sudden, I got it, the form of formlessness. Any form can come out of the formless. Water, put in a huge hole, it's an ocean. You put in a smaller hole, it's a lake. You put it in a big trench, it's a river. You put in a small trench, it's a stream. Put in a plastic bottle, it's a bottle of water. Any form can come out of the formless, the form of formlessness or lake. And of course, the formlessness of form is any form can be broken down into the formless, but that's not with
Yeah,
this.
for
That's
all of our
another system.
listeners, who just got lost, that's the beauty of podcasts. You can rewind and listen to that again, because I will for Notepad. Awesome.
Yeah, but the form of formlessness, any form can come out of the formless. So you've got these 8 basic patterns of change. Then we were lucky to find this system that has 8 palm changes, which actually, as you practice a palm change, you feel that pattern of change inside you. You practice it seriously, you pay attention, you do it carefully, you have to do it mindfully. You can't be thinking of anything else while you're doing it. And eventually you start to feel this pattern of change inside you. And then when you got it strong, you go and you sit and you try and hold it in sitting. And at first it goes away, and you get up and you do the palm change a few more times until you feel it strong again. And then you go and sit and it goes away. And you do that until eventually you can just sit and manifest that change pattern. At which point you have the change pattern fully developed where you can manifest it from motion to stillness by doing the palm change, and from stillness to motion in sitting. And the whole basic beginning is to be able to manifest these 8 basic patterns of change, which gives you a method of studying the I Ching, not just intellectually from the book, like most I Ching scholars do, just intellectually from the book. But with this particular system, you can do it intellectually or mentally, physically, and energetically. So you get all 3 aspects of the change patterns of mental, physical, and energetic. So that's the advantage of having this physical method of studying the patterns of change as opposed to just doing it intellectually, which was an offshoot in Taoism. Most I Ching scholars just work with a book and do it intellectually. But we were lucky to latch on to this offshoot.
Now, if you are just doing the physical practice without the intellectual study and the energetics, tuning into that, like, will you just naturally start feeling it?
No,
You have to do the study
it
with
has
it,
to be
right?
conscious. It has
Right.
to be conscious. And in that case, if you're not going to, although this set of palm changes does have some really nice martial applications that you can learn as an aside, most people doing it do learn as an aside. But if you were going to just do it as a martial art, you might as well do one of the other systems that focuses purely on the martial art.
Mm.
But this system's forte is the development of these 8 basic patterns of change. And also within this particular system of Taoism, which this came from, comes the ideology of the 8 basic layers of a sentient being, the 8 basic energy layers of the sentient being, and colloquially known as the energy bodies. So you have your physical energy body, which is the energy in the flesh. You have your chi energy body, which is the life force energy, which is stored in your lower dantian, travels through your flesh in meridian channels, and emanates out to the level of your chi field, which is also your aura.
Which can
Then you
is
have,
that chi field? Is it different from one person to another?
it's different within people. I mean, if you're having a really strong day, you're really healthy, you're feeling good. You're having a really bad day, you're sick, you're emotionally upset and whatnot. It's, it varies a lot. But, and then you have your emotional energy body, and that's where it comes a big jump because they all start from your center and go. Emotional energy body is where all your emotions come from. The physical energy body is what keeps your flesh alive. The chi energy body is the life force that keeps you alive and connected to the planet. Your emotional energy body is where your emotions come from. And it goes out to the level of the stars that can be seen from the naked eye, from your center out to the level of the stars.
Wow.
And from there, all the rest of them go further and further. You have your thinking energy body. which is where thoughts coalesce before they intellectualize and become cognizant. It's also the starting point of true meditation practices. And most human beings throughout their life mostly work with, usually subconsciously, not even knowing they exist, these first four energy bodies: physical, chi, emotional, and thinking. The fifth energy body is your psychic energy body. We all get psychic flashes. Somebody that can access their psychic energy body all the time is a real psychic. I've met a few of them, and personally, I thought that they sort of gave up some connection to three and four to make this
Mm.
connection really strong with five. But that's
Mm.
just my interpretation of the people that I met that were real psychics.
Mm.
And then six is your thinking. Six is your causal energy body, where the causes that create all the effects in your life begin. All the causes, and we all do it all the time because we all create effects, though we don't usually do it consciously.
Mm.
Someone that could do it consciously would be a real magician, and thank God there's very few or none of them around, because imagine if anybody could create anything, any effect they wanted by accessing their causal body. So it's another one that you connect to mostly subconsciously. And
You're
then
talking about the X-Men now. I'm like, ooh, be a
and
be a mutant.
seven is your body of individuality, everything that differentiates you from everything else. And eight is your body of Tao, your connection to the Tao, which is everything that connects you to everything else. And the average sentient being basically connects one through seven when they are corporate, and two through eight when they are discorporate, or one through seven when you're alive, and two through eight after you're dead. And so you have these eight energy bodies, and they're a whole study of their own. But where they come into this I Ching thing is when you develop these eight energy change patterns that we're talking about, you can use them as a shortcut to accessing the correlating energy body. You want to access your thinking body, you do the fourth palm change, you get your thunder energy, and that's a shortcut
Mm.
to accessing your thinking energy body.
Mm.
You want to get in touch with your emotions, you do your third palm change with this wind amorphous to solid, and it becomes a shortcut to connecting to your emotional energy body. So then you're asking me personally how this can be used. When we first got
Right.
into this particular, what I was just talking about thing, one of my senior students at the time, in fact, was my assistant instructor at the time, and I were both having horrible relationship problems. And we discovered that an awful lot of the relationship problems came from one or two angles. Either you were caught in an emotional feeling and you couldn't get logical about it at all. All you could do is feel, 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 and you couldn't get logical about it.
Mm.
Or you were caught in this thinking scenario and you couldn't even feel what your emotion that brought you with this person in the first place. You couldn't feel the emotion anymore. You could just think in this, caught in this thinking loop. So what we practiced and what we discovered worked really well was if you were caught in the emotional loop, there's also a Taoist thing that says to get away from anything. Anything that's pushed to its ultimate transposes to its opposite. You have
Okay.
to push to the ultimate to transpose it to its opposite. So if we were caught in this horrible emotion, we would do the third palm change over and over again till the emotion got stronger and stronger and stronger until it felt like you're going to drive you completely nuts and you felt like you had reached the ultimate of this emotion. And then we would change direction and go into the fourth palm change.
I was just gonna
And
say,
usually,
watch a bunch of romantic comedies and try to get a. I'm like, get real emotional to try to break through the emotion.
well, the whole
But
thing is when you turn and you switch to the fourth palm change, it
yes,
snaps you into the thinking energy body. And bingo, suddenly you could just think clearly about it.
so it sounds
And
like
it worked.
it sounds
And
like
it
these
worked.
little hacks kind of thing.
And
Yeah.
vice versa, if you were caught in a thinking loop and you couldn't get the emotions doing anymore, you would do the fourth palm change over and over and over and over again until you felt like this thinking loop was driving you
Mm.
completely mad and you felt it was as strong as it could get. And then you would change direction and do the third palm change, and it would snap you into the emotional energy body. And suddenly you could feel what you felt about this person,
Mm.
which we, and it actually worked for us. We both did it. We both had opposite problems, and we both worked it and discussed it and studied it. And and I'm sure there are various other things you could do with the other energy change patterns and the other energy bodies. But this is the one that I worked that I could tell you definitely worked. It definitely felt you could snap from being caught in a thinking loop to feeling again. You could snap from getting caught in an emotional loop to thinking again, and it really worked.
And so it's kind of like also it sounds like it gives you once you break through from that the thinking loop to the emotion loop or vice versa, that you get, like you were saying, you get more clarity about where you were, what brought you there, um, easier to do
Well, this is just moving
reflection.
from one to the other.
Right.
This
But
other thing is the studying in general of the pattern of change.
mm-hmm.
And that had more to, that gets into the readings of the hexagrams. This is
Okay.
just working with the pure trigram energy. So it's just basic change.
Mm.
It's a basic feeling, thinking change, which is different from the hexagram stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we learned this, this teacher just took us this far. He didn't teach us anything about how to manifest the hexagrams. And in fact, when I would ask him, he would come up with stuff that, quite frankly, I think that the trigrams is as far as he learned it from his teacher. That's just my speculation. Maybe he just didn't want to give it to us. Maybe he just didn't want to give it to me. I don't know. But he would give me something. You know, I was paying a bunch for a private lesson. I'd come back with something, but it wasn't exactly what was going on. And eventually, after like a decade and a half of working this trigram thing, I was aware that we had to have some kind of vehicle of 64 to do the hexagrams.
Mm.
And then eventually I learned the classical 64 palm chain system of Chung style Baguazhang, which had nothing to do directly with the I Ching. It was just a vehicle of 64 movements. As a matter of fact, Chung style as a martial art is based on 8 strategies. And in straight up Chung style Bagua, the 64 are to show you that the strategies are not married to one little simple set of movements. So you have 8 variations of each of the strategies,
Mm.
which give you a template as to how to fit those strategies into anywhere and develop the 8 basic strategies of Chung style, which maybe we'll do something on that at some point. But it gave us this vehicle of 64. I'm like, oh, we got a vehicle. But the palm changes do not develop the energies the way the I Ching set does.
Mm.
But so then it could only work with students who had done the trigram level to the point where they could manifest those energy change patterns both in the palm change and in sitting. And they could really do it. Which, because it's over the years of trying to do this, I discovered students doing the advanced stuff that think they have the basic stuff down and they don't, and it gets a little strange. But eventually, you know, we always go back and go over the basics again and try and drill it in and get them to really get it. And it always works for everybody else to do it as a booster anyway.
Mm.
But the whole thing was they had to have it, because what I came up with was you had to be able to sit, and in sitting manifest 2 of the change patterns at once to make a hexagram. And you
Mm.
had to have them developed enough in sitting that you could sit down and manifest 2 of them simultaneously. Then stand up, do the correlating Bagua palm change, and insert what you had done in sitting into the palm change.
Right.
You had to be able to manifest it in sitting and then insert it into the palm change, because it wasn't naturally in the palm change. When you inserted it into the palm change, then you had it from motion to stillness after developing it from stillness to motion in the sitting. And that way we got the system to go with the 64 hexagrams. And then we started doing stuff where we'd pick a hexagram for a class and we would sit and try and manifest those two patterns in sitting. When you got it, you would get up and do the correlating from the 64 palms palm change and insert the energy into it. Then we would talk about what you felt in sitting, where you inserted it, and it could be different for all people because you're putting it in the palm change wherever you find it easy to manifest it in there. And then read the corresponding hexagram and see how what we did fit with what it said in the book about that hexagram. And that's how we developed our study of the hexagram level, which is more about your general life patterns and the changes throughout life overall when you get to the all 64. So we developed that personally as our method of doing Ba Gua energetic and physical to match the 64 hexagrams so we could correlate it with the readings in the book.
What were we doing in the Carolinas during that intensive, Frank, where we would pick sort of a pivotal moment in life in our past and try to sense what was the change pattern it was in? We weren't working yet with the 64 hands, right? That was before that.
Well, 64 palms.
Not sorry,
64 hands is
palms.
another whole thing that we get into at some point. It's
Right.
a whole other system
Right.
that we'll talk about at some point. But yeah, no, we were not doing the 64 palms or the hexagram level of the hexagram energies. We were just trying to work with the trigram energies and their correlation to the 8 energy bodies. Mm-hmm. And trying to get something, like I said, it worked for Billy and I at the time because we were having relationship problems that brought us right to the emotional and thinking energy body. So what I was doing was trying to have people come up with something that was intense in their life and figure out which of the 8 it felt more like. And then if it was something that they wanted to change, we'd try to do that thing that Bill and I did between emotional and thinking.
Right.
There was a point where we were doing it where we were actually doing hexagrams, but I don't remember the specific details of it because I remember that's when I came up with the innermost sincerity hexagram for that moment. So I don't remember the specifics terribly well. I just remember that we were working with trying to dig through the nuance of what pattern we were in at that point in our life.
Are you sure that was in a retreat and not classes?
No, it was down in the Carolinas. We were all sitting around at that, what'd they call it? Was it Heavenly Mountain or something that we were at? Mm-hmm. And Kate and Tom were there, and I think Dr. Earl was there. Yeah. I wish I could remember more of the specifics of it. But I mean, basically the idea is that you can, Shawn, that you can either look at something that has already passed and sort of examine it to try to feel what change pattern you were in at that time or which of the hexagrams were applying to it, or theoretically in a given moment that you can also sense what pattern you're in, and you can look at the I Ching then and get insight into that situation from reading the actual entry in the I Ching.
Right. I mean, because how many of us live our lives just kind of like, lost, not connected at all, and kind of just being taken through a wild journey and not really able to examine and not learn lessons from past experiences because we're not having this kind of conversation with ourselves. It sounds like the study of the I Ching with the connection to, like you were saying, Frank, this physical capability of like
and
hacking
physical
into
and
the
energetic.
physical and energetic with the Baguazhang practices. Just seems like such a worthwhile endeavor to learn how to examine one's life and examines one's existence.
Well, it starts with recognizing all life is change, which I think many people don't these days. They think everything's stable,
Mm.
and nothing is ever stable. The only thing that doesn't change, the only thing that doesn't change is the fact that everything changes. That's the one stable thing that there is. That's like the stable reality behind the phenomenon of change, is that you can absolutely count on the fact that everything changes. And after doing this hexagram thing in these readings for a few years, I've also noticed that a big lesson that the I Ching gives over and over and over again is no matter how bad things get, it's going to change.
Hmm.
It will get better. So try not to totally bottom out and lose yourself completely
Right.
in the negativity, because the positivity will be back. And on the other end of it, no matter how good things get, do not think it's going to last forever, because it will change in the other direction. And it doesn't mean don't enjoy the good things. Enjoy the good things to their fullest. But don't kid yourself into thinking it's not eventually going to change in the other direction, because everything changes. And that seems to be, from what I could tell, the biggest basic lesson of the study of the I Ching. That no matter how bad it gets, don't bottom out, because it will get better. No matter how good it gets, don't get crazy, spend all your money, because you're going to have money no matter what or whatever. Leave yourself enough leeway for the fact that when it changes, you can deal with it.
Mm. And so, as we come near to the end of the episode here, for someone who is hearing this podcast and like, oh, this sounds so cool, I want to start learning and studying this stuff, or maybe I have been and I want to take it to the next level, what would you say are like some beginner ways, I guess, or starting points for people to start, studying these things, studying the I Ching and its correlation to Baguazhang?
Well, you can study the I Ching intellectually by getting a good I Ching, like Alfred Huang's Complete I Ching or one of those, and reading the introduction, which will give you an idea to go about it and work with it from there. As far as this physical, energetic Bagua thing, I think unfortunately it's one of those studies in life that you need a good teacher. It's not something you can do on your own, and certainly not something you want to do with an incompetent teacher. There are certain studies in life that the only way to do it is to find a good teacher. And there are people out there that know this, so you look for them.
Awesome. Jon, you had any final questions? I know Jon wants to get deep.
Well, I had a variety of things that I was going to try to bring up, but I think we're pretty close to the end. I think there's a lot of interesting correlations between the Chinese way of thinking of the I Ching and Western understandings of physics and things. Like to me, the Chinese creation is very similar to the Big Bang. The idea of an undifferentiated one that splits into two. So the Baguazhang, or the Tai Chi splits into four. So the complex Tai Chi splits out into the eight, and then furthermore, and into the, what do they call it, Frank? It's something like the many things, but basically
the 10,000 things.
Okay.
Of course, I've always correlated the Big Bang Theory that people don't realize that, like I said, everything changes. Everything changes completely. And we're on the yang aspect of everything separating. And we have the Big Bang Theory. And I figure eventually everything will start coming together, and they'll have the Big Crunch Theory. It's like
So, I mean, there's that aspect that I think there's some correlation. I think there's also potentially a correlation or some type of understanding of these, both the Bagua, the 8 energies, and then also the 64, with something like energy waves, or something like string theory, and talking about different dimensions and things. Like, physics talks about a lot of this stuff, and for those of us that aren't doing higher math and all of that, it's conceptually difficult. And I think there is some conceptual difficulty in the Baguazhang and the Chinese philosophy as well. But it's somehow these energies of creation or of change, as Frank is saying. It's what is change? It is time and it is space. You have to have time for something to be changing, and you have to have something that is changing. So this idea of sort of how time and reality manifests is running through with a pattern, and the I Ching stuff gets very much into that emergence of the reality that we're in, the time and the space, and how things are moving.
Awesome. Frank, any final thoughts before we close out for today?
Well, as I just said, it's an interesting study, and the whole concept is to just be aware that life is constant change, and try and understand it and work with it in any way that works for you in the best way that you can. But don't fool yourself into thinking that things are stagnant and steady. Be aware of the fact that everything is always changing.
Awesome. Cool. So we'll close out there. And if anyone has any follow-up questions or wants to find out about any of the online offerings that we have at the Wudang, definitely check out the show notes, and you can find all the links to see what's going on at the school, and if you're in New York City, how to access it, and if you're not, what virtual offerings are available to you. And of course, drop us the review, the likes, all that kind of stuff. Subscribe. Even though we haven't been as active in the past couple of weeks, we've had a lot of great activity on our YouTube channel, and a lot more subscribers, and so we really appreciate all that. But definitely, share it with a friend, and get people learning about what we're sharing on this podcast, because this is some really valuable stuff that Frank, John are just dishing out for free. So we got to take advantage of it. All right, cool. So we'll close out there, and we'll be back next week with another episode. And I'll speak to y'all then.
All right. Have a great day.
John. Take care.
Tang,